Thank you very much, and apologies for the Jeremy Clarkson. I wondered about should I put him in, but it's just a lovely, if that's the right word, example of what I mean by vegaphobia, which is a way of summing up anti-vegan stereotypes, basically. And the quote from Clarkson shows that these are still alive and well. We probably all know that anyway. We've probably heard them many times. And this talk is kind of rooted in research that I did such a long time ago that I'm amazed I'm here talking about it still, but I'm very grateful to be doing so. So what is it? So it's rooted in this research that I carried out with Karen Morgan, a fellow sociologist and good friend of mine. And this came about when we first went vegan, and we experienced, as probably everybody has in various ways, kind of anti-vegan discourse, chat, jokes, whatever, putting down vegans, taking the mickey out of vegans and so forth. So we thought, well, why is that? What's going on here? So this is back in like 2006 or something. So we thought, well, we're sociologists, we better try and find out. We better find out using our sociological, methodological tools and kind of do this properly and move beyond anecdotes. So that's what we did in this paper that you can see on the screen. This is the first time we used the term vegaphobia, although the word itself was coined by Erica Cubworth, who's another fantastic vegan sociologist and friend, suggested this to me in a pub when I was talking about research one day. All good ideas come from pubs. Or many of them do. So this is the first piece of research, and as well as finding out what these stereotypes were, how they operated, we wanted to assert that research in this was a legitimate topic for sociology, because back in those days it felt like it was quite a strange thing to be doing, and sociology as a discipline was quite inhospitable to talking about veganism or non-human animals in any kind of way. That's changed thanks to the work of many fantastic people over the years. I'm happy to say it's now got a legitimate place within the discipline, which is really cool. So the research itself, what did we do? We thought we'd look at UK print media, which was more significant then than it is now, I guess. So this was our sample. We found 397 news stories in the whole year of 2007, the most recent complete year at the time we started. And we were basically really surprised at how negative it was. So we had these anecdotal experiences, but when we did the research, we were like, oh my goodness, it's even worse than we feared. So almost relentlessly negative coverage of veganism, and you can maybe tell that from the table if you look at the bottom line, the total line. We also found traces of intersections with other forms of oppression. So I flagged up sexism and ableism there, and a lot of that was focused on Heather Mills McCartney, as she was at the time, who got some horrendous abuse in mainstream newspapers based on her disability, her gender, as well as her veganism, which is, awful to witness. We also saw another key finding was this disarticulation, this separation of veganism from anti-speciesism. I suppose what I mean by that is that animals were almost entirely absent from this coverage. So vegans are being slagged off on a number of bases, but not really to do with being for animals or for animal rights or animal protection or liberation or whatever. And the other thing that we noticed that's interesting and become ever more prominent is these first signs of what we called lifestyle veganism. So focusing on veganism as a kind of consumer lifestyle, veganism as a commodified kind of way of life, that kind of thing, which has become more of an issue over time, which is a real double-edged sword. So these were the stereotypes. These are in order of frequency that we found. So most common, vegans were ridiculed, which is treated as, ridiculous for even attempting to be vegan, and the whole notion of veganism is nonsense. The next one, ascetic veganism. What I mean by that is this vision of vegans being self-denying, pleasure-denying, because being vegan is, miserable, the food's awful, so we must be ascetic in this kind of way. The next most common was that veganism is impossible, so like it's literally practically unachievable to live as a vegan, and therefore it's dismissed in that way. Next, that it's a fad, and I've seen that come up in at least one other talk today. I can't remember which one, apologies, but this is still a very live one. So veganism is just this fad, it will pass, so don't worry about it. Next, that vegans are oversensitive, we're over-sentimental, we can't take a joke, we're humorless. And then lastly, maybe thankfully lastly, vegans are actively hostile, like opposed to non-vegans and kind of attacking non-vegans in some way. So those were the stereotypes, a quick overview of them. So this was a long time ago now. So what's happened since? So I'm very gratified by the fact that our research has been replicated a number of times. So I'm just going to touch on a few examples here today to show that, sadly, it still works. It's still got resonance. So Masterman, Smith, Ragusa, and Crampton's, they kind of replicated our methodology in Australia, 2014, and their headline findings were, quite similar. The overall themes that they uncovered are that vegans are portrayed as irrational and that practicing veganism was impossible. So still those themes continuing. Lisa Barker, 2020 in the USA, again, carried out a kind of variation on our methodology, I suppose. And she found, to quote from her chapter, newspaper coverage deflects the ethical dimensions of veganism and portrays vegans as cultural others by reproducing stereotypes. So this is really, really important, this deflecting the ethical dimensions of veganism. And just to go back to that original finding, this was so surprising because when we started out, we thought, okay, we'll probably find some negative stuff, but we assumed it would be in relation to things like ALF actions or something. So like these vegan ALF, nutters or something. That's the kind of thing we were expecting to find, but we didn't. So a coverage of animal rights issues, scant as it was, is kind of kept as a separate thing, which is, seemed really strange. But through doing this research and reading the work of others, this kind of makes sense from the enemy's point of view, if you know what I mean. Because if you ridicule vegans, stereotype us in these negative ways, it means the mainstream is insulated from confronting the animal ethical issues which underpin what we're doing. So it kind of makes this weird sense from that point of view to not talk about animals when you're talking about veganism. And just to come on to another couple of examples, both from UK-based sociologists. Corey Wren is from the US, but she's working at Kent University now. And in her research, again, replicating or variation of our original research. So one of the amazing things, and here's some good news, is that she found a 100 times increase in the volume of media coverage. So if you remember, our original sample was like 397 articles. So back then we were able to be exhaustive. So we were able to actually read and analyze every single article that we found that mentioned veganism. That is no longer possible for any researcher. So that's good news, right? It's more than you can fit in sort of one research project, if you like. So that's good. But the second finding, only 1 out of 420 articles, so she took a small sample from that, what's that, 40,000 potential articles, only 1 in 420 actually foregrounded non-human animal suffering. So again, this separation of veganism from other animals is still going on. And also, picking up on that earlier finding about lifestyle veganism, in Corey's words, most of the positive coverage was market focused. So it's more about an exciting new vegan product, something that feeds into the commodification of veganism, arguably. So Norm's research, Norm is a PhD student at Essex University. He found some similar kinds of things as well. He found overall there is a progressive trend, and by that I mean the volume or the proportion of positive coverage is going up and the negative coverage is trending downwards. But he still found the coverage was 2.5 times more negative than positive. So still, even though, well, I guess this is 4 years old, but still this is pretty recent, even though we probably, well, I get a sense that we are making progress, things are getting better, we're here, the room is full, amazing, there's all this fantastic work going on. But despite all that, out in the mainstream, the coverage is still overwhelmingly negative. You know, it's still really bad. We're still getting panned in the mainstream media just for being vegan, or veganism is being panned. And again, Norm found that non-human animals are still absent, largely speaking, from this coverage. So that connection, the underpinning motivation, the rationale, the philosophy behind veganism is still not breaking through. So admittedly, we're only talking about print media here because this is what these pieces of research have all focused on. So the picture might be different on social media, TV, et cetera, et cetera. So bear in mind those caveats. And I just also wanted to highlight the little link at the bottom. So you can see Norm and Corey, and indeed myself and Karen, talking about our research on this YouTube video, which was hosted, a talk hosted by the International Association of Vegan Sociologists, IAVS. So you can look up their website, you can find a link to it, or you can just, you know, you'll find it on YouTube easily enough. So it's like an hour-long talk of all of us discussing this in more detail. So check that out. So as the title of my talk today was, how do we respond constructively to this? What do we do about it, basically? So I've got a couple of things I wanted to share, and then I was going to just raise it as a question and for ideas and so on. So one of the things I'm lucky enough to be able to do at the Open University where I work is actually teach about some of this stuff. So the screen grab on the slide there is from a research methods textbook. Always what, you know, students find most exciting, how to do research methods, but it's vital and they all have to do it. So it's a great way of making sure that everybody encounters this kind of material, because this is not a vegan studies course, this is just a social research methods course. So sociology students and criminology students at the OU do this course. So I was able to use the original vegaphobia research as like a case study of how you would do kind of media analysis. So that's one way to try and confront these stereotypes and get people to learn the skills of critiquing them and unpicking them and so on, and deconstructing them. And the link there, so you can check out the course online, or you can get an overview of the course. And if you feel like doing a degree at the OU, you know, please come along and do this course, and that'll be wonderful. And another way that I've been trying to do it is through Open Learn. So I gave another talk this morning. I'm very grateful to have had a second go. Thank you ever so much to the organisers. I'm very grateful. So if you weren't there, if you can check out that recording when it comes out to learn more detail about this. But in a nutshell, for these purposes, this Veganism Interactive is on this free public education website platform called Open Learn that hosts like literally thousands of courses and all kinds of topics. It's an amazing space. So I've been able to create this interactive about veganism on there, and as part of that, alongside other videos and things that I spoke about this morning, there is this section of the interactive where you can actually learn about, again, the original research. So we've got vegaphobia there, negative media stereotypes. And Open Learn is aimed at the public. It's not aimed at undergraduates or postgraduates. It's for all adult learners. So it's written to be accessible and understandable and not covered in jargon and everything, apart from vegaphobia itself, I suppose. But, you know, I explain it in there. So that's another way of responding constructively and trying to again, give people the skills to deconstruct these kind of stereotypes when they encounter them, whether they're vegan or not, and not just to accept them as the way things are, the way vegans are. And another super recent example that I'm very excited to share, having been to the film premiere just a couple of days ago in Soho in London, which was amazing, a window onto another world of glamour for me. And even more excitingly, of course, my partner is in the film. So that's my partner, Kate Stewart, with the blue hair there, being interviewed. So this is a still image from the film trailer. So she's in the trailer as well. So you can all check that out. So the film, I Could Never Go Vegan, that phrase is kind of, it recurs throughout the film, and it's responding to reasons people give why I could never go vegan. So although the film is not at all based on our original research, I'm sure the filmmakers didn't read it. I'll ask them just to check, but I'm sure they didn't. I think implicitly it does address those original negative stereotypes about ridiculing vegans and vegans are hostile, oversensitive, all the rest of them, through the way it gives a counterpoint to the various reasons that people typically give about why they could never go vegan. And another aspect of it that I thought was really positive is it does foreground non-human animals and their suffering, their exploitation, and why we should care about it. And it kind of leads up to it through the film's narrative. So it comes about halfway through or something that you start encountering that material. But it's tremendously powerful. And they've, through the magic of editing and skillful filmmaking, I suppose, they've kept a 12A film certificate to make it as accessible as possible, despite some of the footage being quite, very uncomfortable. But of course, it could always be much more uncomfortable, much more unpleasant, much more violent. So I recommend checking out the film, and it's got a limited theatrical release. It's actually going to be on at the Odeon, which is amazing. I think on the 30th of April, various Odeon cinemas, and it's on at some picture houses and Curzons as well. And I think it's going to get a streaming platform release to be confirmed, but it will be on some streaming platform. So I think that's a good way of doing it too, through the mass media, if you like. So that's kind of where I wanted to end it, other than to raise this question of what can we do about it, whatever it is that we do through activism and our professional roles, if we're educators, but also in our personal lives. So what's the best way to counter these kind of negative discourses? So what I try to do in my own work is to refocus on non-human animals, and through that Veganism Interactive, focus on anti-speciesism as the core of what veganism is. And the purpose there is to sweep away this separation of veganism from non-human animals and their exploitation, just ignore it and get straight to what I think is the key, and to encourage people to recognize that speciesism is a social structure in which we're all captured, whether we're vegan or not. And therefore, it needs structural solutions. We need to change the social structure so that it's a vegagenic structure rather than a speciesist-ogenic structure as it currently is. But yeah, there's all kinds of ways we could potentially respond to it, I think, through just some of those avenues. So even though I finished early, which is like unheard of for me because I tend to ramble, but I should take that and not attempt to ramble and use up more space. So I'll stop there and invite questions. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. Can we have hands up for questions? Perfect.
Thanks. Earlier in the talk, you spoke about how in your research you found that there were sort of signs of veganism as a lifestyle. So my question is, not everyone goes vegan for the ethical reasons. Are there studies that show why people go vegan? And if they don't go vegan for ethical reasons, then is it possible that the media representation of veganism as divorced from some of these ethical considerations is accurately reflecting why people go vegan in the first place?
That's an excellent question. And I suspect there's some kind of self-fulfilling prophecy aspect to it. Because if you promote veganism as an attractive lifestyle rather than a negatively stigmatized one, then some people are going to be attracted and get into it for those reasons, okay? Which is fine, as long as it doesn't stop there, because then there's always the risk that, yes, it is a fad, and then the next thing will come along. But I think, one of the issues with that as well is that it kind of undercuts the campaigning that many of us do in this room, and that I do as an academic as well and as a teacher. And it makes our lives much more difficult if we just accept that as the truth. But in terms of research about why people go vegan, yes, there is. There's kind of loads. I can't list you a load of references off the top of my head, but there is quite a lot on that. And what it tends to find is that reasons multiply. So whatever the first reason is that people go vegan, it rarely stops there. They will add to it. And I've heard other people speak about this today, again, I can't remember which talk, but, you know, going vegan for one reason is one thing, but then you tend to research and find out more. So you add further reasons and they compound each other. And I think this is one of the real risks with, if you like, lifestyle veganism. If it only stays at that level, it's really quite fragile. And when you hear about people who are ex-vegans, you know, it'll often be things like, you know, I couldn't get on with the lifestyle. You know, I couldn't keep up with I didn't know enough about cooking or nutrition or something. So it's easy to sort of slip away from it. But if people do more reading about animal rights and environmental reasons and all the things we know about, it solidifies it and becomes more of a core of your identity. So yeah, there is research. Sorry, I can't remember it, but there is quite a lot on that. Yeah, if that answers your question.
I think we had a hand up.
There's been a lot of discussion in some of the other workshops and talks we've had here about the extent to which any publicity could be good publicity. So do you know if there's any research into any potential benefits that the vegan movement might have from the scale of media coverage, regardless of whether it's positive or negative?
Yeah, another great question. I don't know. I don't know the direct answer to that. But I think there's certainly opportunities to capitalize on that coverage. So how can we make use of it? So like I've made use of it through teaching about it. So, you know, that's one thing you can do. But I think a positive you can make of, well, I said lifestyle veganism is a double-edged sword. So there is an upside to it. It does increase visibility and awareness. So then what do we do about that? So I think what comes with that is more people being curious about veganism and asking questions. And then, of course, we can have a whole bunch of answers that take them in different directions and hopefully enrich veganism for them and encourage them. But in terms of actual research on the effects of that, I'm not aware of any. That would make a fantastic PhD topic for somebody to do. But yeah, thanks for your question.
Cool. Does anyone else have a question?
Thanks. I was just curious if you have any thoughts on I think about that documentary, for example, and other kind of materials, information that's out there about trying to challenge these stereotypes and issues. And I always worry a little bit that the only people who are going to watch them are people who are already kind of aligned a little bit. So I'm kind of wondering, you know, what can we do to attract people who have that negative stereotypes about veganism already, so they don't necessarily want to engage? How can we kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, totally. Again, fantastic question. This was exactly one of the questions that came up at the film premiere. There was a show of hands. Who's vegan? It was like 70% or something. So again, how do we take this? So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't have the solutions, but again, one of the things I try in my own teaching is that I embed this stuff within broader, more general modules. So I'm a criminology lecturer, so I'm able to look at harms against non-human animals as a criminological topic alongside others. And I think that's actually quite a useful thing to do because it means that all the students encounter it and a lot of them are not expecting it. And of course, I get some vegan students and they're like, oh, fantastic, I had no idea this would be here, this is amazing. Some slightly defensive responses, but most students just take it in their stride and they're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I can see how this is worthy of our attention alongside all the other harms that humans suffer that criminologists look at. So yeah, finding ways to weave it in to the way we deal with other people can be useful. But yeah, I think all of us struggle with that question of how do we avoid just talking to ourselves sort of thing. But we must be, because it feels like there are more of us, right? The numbers of vegans are growing. This is just, I could never have imagined this like 15 years ago. This event is just so cool. So I'm hopeful, but yeah, sorry, I haven't got I wish I had all the answers to that. We all do, right?
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I think it's a topic that we don't take seriously enough as a movement. We just kind of brush it off and say, oh, the Daily Mail says that. That's just quite silly, and we laugh at it, but it is a serious structural problem. And my question is, we're talking about responses and reactions here, but I think there's an equally, if not larger portion of work that needs to be proactive and quite introspective and looking like, as a movement, have we othered ourselves? Like, have we overbonded so that only people that we know are vegans? Have we given the media an open goal here, basically. So we really wanted to hear your take on, do we as a movement need to take a large share of responsibility for giving it on a plate to the tabloid media to do this to us, and we need to make changes because of that?
Yeah, another fantastic question. Yeah, thanks again. I think, the types of evidence we were looking at was sort of not that, because it was so over the top, misplaced, misguided. It wasn't rooted in truth, if you know what I mean. But certainly, there are instances of where, and again, I heard this in another talk that I can't remember which one it was, like vegan infighting can be really destructive if that's played out publicly on social media and so forth. Then it makes it easier to characterize us as humorless, oversensitive, even hostile, and so forth. So that is an own goal for sure, or can be an own goal. So I think where we have disagreements about strategy and tactics and that kind of thing, I think it's better if we can discuss that, rationally, respectfully, sort of behind closed doors almost. Let's get in a room, let's have a conference like this and talk about these issues. So I think, yes, there is potential to feed those stereotypes and amplify them, and we should definitely avoid that. But I think the media they're really good at, they don't need us to do that. They'll stigmatize us anyway, whatever we're doing, because this supports the mainstream. So we all know, and again, this was in a previous talk, the Viva talk. I remembered one, Viva talk, about asking people to share their stories of becoming vegan and what was it that made them go vegan and so forth, and imagining who they were before they made that transition. So for the vast majority of people who are before that period of becoming vegan, the mainstream media stereotyping supports them in being comfortable in not taking that step, because it makes it easier just to say, oh yeah, veganism, that's not for me, it's ridiculous, they're all crazy, and all the stereotype kind of things. So I think the stereotyping would exist regardless of what we do as vegans, and did exist before we became more prominent, if you know what I mean. So yeah, does that answer your question? Oh, yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, we've got another one over here.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It was really good. And I love the academic side of things, which I would like to follow up a bit more on, please. So I was thinking about what, from your experience, from the papers you've read or things like that, are the theoretical frameworks that seem to underpin these ideas, because I'd be interested to have these that you could literally use as templates to then, create messages, even create ideas, test these things. If you could elaborate or signpost me at least, please.
Yeah, another good question. I'm going to struggle to answer that one, to be honest, in terms of templates. I mean, I'll be very happy to kind of share the paper with you and talk to you more about, how we did what we did and so forth. And there is a theoretical underpinning of what we're doing, which I guess is kind of Foucauldian, if that means anything to anyone. Michel Foucault, the social theorist. But in terms of kind of evaluating the impact of these stereotypes and that kind of work, that would be a separate piece of work that I'd love to do. I've never had funding to do that, and I think that would absolutely be well worth doing. So I could talk about ideas of how to do that, but I haven't done it, and I'm not aware of anyone who has done it. There may be people I don't know of course, but yeah. So sorry, I can't give you a decent answer to that, but I think, again, an excellent question, and yeah, we should be doing that if we can. But I mean, the issue with a lot of this stuff is funding, unfortunately, in academia, and it's still quite difficult to get, pro-vegan funding, research funding, if you like, although lots of us are trying. But doing the kind of original research, the media analysis, the reason why a lot of that has been done is because you can just do it without funding, because you don't have participants to go through ethical clearance. It's all just newspapers. So if you've got the time, you can do the research. But in terms of assessing the effects of it, other than within the media itself on actual people, then that's more expensive, for one thing.